Welcome to another edition to Behind the Investigation on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Andy Perotti. Joining me now is Chief Investigative Reporter Brendan Keefe. How you doing, Brendan?
Good to see you, Andy.
So this investigation that we're going to take a step back and look behind the curtain, it's about how law enforcement within school districts have a disparity in the weapons that they have in the event of a mass school shooting. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I mean, here's what it comes down to. There's 415 million guns in the United States. Even if they were banned today, new purchases, there would still be 415 million guns. And the big school shootings that we've seen, Uvalde, Parkland, all over the country, Newtown, those involved assault rifles, whatever you want to call them. They're long guns, they're rifles, which have far more lethality and more accuracy. And so the question we asked was, if the shooters that are entering these schools on a number of occasions have these rifles that are far more accurate and more lethal, why don't the police have them? Do they have them? Do they have the training in them? And if they don't, why not? That was the simple question.
Let's take a look.
Let's go!
They just went in without hesitation.
Metro Police!
You see these things on the news, but when it's your kid's school, you see them going through their classroom.
Hold the door!
You see them going through the rooms that you know your kid's in. You're watching them clear these spaces that your child plays in.
Sarah Shoup Newman was close to Covenant School when the first shots were fired.
My son was not at the school. He was with my husband, so I knew that he was safe, thank God. We were spared so much in comparison to many of our friends and the staff there.
The Nashville officers had patrol rifles. The school shooter had rifles too.
Rifle first, blue, go. Go, 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 go. Go, go, go.
3 grade schoolers and 3 staff members were killed before the officers reached the shooter.
Do you believe lives were saved that day?
Absolutely. I wish that all of them would have been, but there absolutely were numerous lives saved.
Push the LPVS, go right. Reloading. Suspect down, suspect down.
That video affirms the need for rifles. Being able to address a threat from that distance, that affirms it.
Chief Ronald Applin leads the police department for Atlanta Public Schools.
On the first day of school, how many rifle qualified officers do you have on your department?
I won't have any. I won't have any.
But that's going to change.
That is going to change, correct.
Chief Applin says the school district has obtained 7 rifles. But for now, the more than 100 officers who protect Atlanta Public Schools train only with pistols. Just 1 county south.
Stay right there, please.
In Peachtree City.
Police department.
Every school resource officer.
Police department.
Trains on and has access to a patrol rifle.
The range of accuracy for a pistol in the hands of a trained police officer is roughly 10 to 15 yards. The range of accuracy for a rifle in the hands of an amateur can be greater than 100 yards, leaving the school police officer outgunned if all they have is a pistol.
If you have an officer that has to take a shot in a school, in a crowded school, you don't want them to miss.
Mo Kennedy protected this high school in Alabama. Now he runs the National Association of School Resource Officers.
This hallway we're in, at least 100 yards long. Would I prefer to have a long gun in a situation here if I were faced with an active assailant? Absolutely, 100%. And the thing that we also have to look at is that many of these active assailants are armed with a long gun.
City police in Atlanta have patrol rifles. They used those rifles when responding to the Midtown shooting earlier this year.
Clear.
But right now, if Atlanta school officers need a rifle, they'll have to wait for city officers to back them up.
When there is a school shooting, the primary role of that officer in the school is to neutralize that shooter.
100%. We can't wait. If we wait, there's a really good chance it's costing us lives.
We didn't want to come in looking like we're the military, of course. That's not what we're here for. But at the end of the day, I do understand and I recognize that that is a tool that's going to give our officers an advantage.
Do you envision a point in the future where every one of your officers is patrol rifle qualified?
I would say every officer who's mobile, I'll start there, not in the school. I'm not quite ready for that yet.
We reviewed the training files of every school police officer for a dozen Metro Atlanta departments. The percentage of rifle-qualified officers closely mirrors the political makeup of each district.
There are around 415 million guns in our country. If gun control measures were put in place today, those guns are still there. We still have to defend against those guns, regardless of the politics on this.
They're risking their lives, so we need to at least make sure that they're given the best chance at survival for that.
Covenant parent Sarah Shoup Newman is fighting to keep rifles out of the hands of future school shooters.
Police department!
And to put them in the hands of school police.
Some people will watch this and say, wait, the answer to the problem with these guns isn't more guns.
We need more than damage mitigation. We need prevention. These kids saw their friends dead, and they're 9 years old. You don't get those images out of your head.
Really compelling story, Brendan. Let's take a step back. Let's go behind the curtain, take a look at this story from the very beginning. Thank God Atlanta Metro Schools has not ever had a mass school shooting. So why did you decide to take a look at this issue in particular?
You know, the thing you hear every time there's a shooting, and unfortunately it's happening with so much more regular frequency. I remember covering Columbine from a distance, and the sort of SWAT team response, and then multiple shootings after that. Instead of sort of anomalies, they've become part of the landscape, to the point where my kids in their school have to do these drills all the time. So it's not a question of, could this happen here? For a lot of schools, it's when is it going to happen here? It doesn't mean it's going to happen in every school, thank God. But we have to be prepared. And as a parent, that's where it really came from for me, was to ask these questions. And this is a difficult issue because you heard me say in the story, the answer to guns in schools isn't necessarily more guns. And what do you say to that is what I asked the Covenant mom, because she represented sort of both sides of the issue. She's simultaneously advocating for gun control. At the same time, she's saying, I want these particular rifles in the hands of people who are protecting schools. But how far down the road do we go? Do we militarize these schools?
Right.
Do we, do you want your kids going in where there's essentially armed guards with rifles at the entrance? And what message does that send? How do you learn in that environment? These are questions we simply can't answer right now. What we do know is that there is a push to protect these schools, because every time there's a school shooting, you hear the parents say, we never thought it would happen here. You're not hearing that anymore because people are saying, I've always feared this was going to happen at my school. That's the change, and it's been in the last year or so.
In the story, I think I heard you mention that historically many mass school shooters use semi-automatic rifles, not long guns that you're saying that many school districts don't have, that experts say should. Talk about the difference. Can you talk about the difference between the two guns?
The whole reason I did that sort of on-camera bit in the hallway was because I didn't want to get sort of lost in the mechanics of guns. I've been a lifelong shooter. I used to shoot competition pistol, and so I do have a lot of, I've even taught journalists about firearms and how they work, so I can speak at least with a sort of disinterested third-party expertise on the mechanics of firearms. A lot of people call them assault rifles, but in reality, mechanically, they work the same as any other semi-automatic rifle. A hunting rifle that's semi-automatic is going to function in many of the same ways as an assault rifle. And an assault rifle, obviously, you call it what it is. You call a butter knife because you use it for butter. But if you use it to attack someone, it's an assault weapon. So that's a distinction a lot of people, sort of on the pro-gun side will often point out. The colloquial definition is essentially a collapsible stock, sometimes a sight, but hunting rifles use sights too, an extended magazine that holds more rounds, and then also what they call a Picatinny rail, which is those things to add sort of different accessories to the rifle. They look very imposing. The sort of AR-15 style, Bushmaster style rifles look very imposing, but in terms of ammunition and barrel length, they essentially function the same as a hunting rifle. They're slotted for either .223, 5.56, 7.62 ammunition. These are extremely high velocity rounds, but the big thing that makes a rifle more accurate, the sort of bottom line it for you, is that it's a long gun, it's shoulder supported, so you have 3 points of support. A pistol is only 2 points of support. The standard setup for a police officer is going to be what they call isosceles, where you lock the elbows, where a casual shooter might shoot what they in this way, where they're not. But you're only supporting it with 2 points, 2 hands. When you're shooting a shoulder-fired weapon, it's rested. The buttstock is against your shoulder. You're then holding it with both hands, and then you have either a sight or a scope, and then on top of that, you have the long barrel, which actually improves accuracy. The reason this matters is it's an order of magnitude more accurate. A pistol at range is a fraction of the accuracy. Even in the hands of a really good experienced shooter or a police officer who's had a tremendous amount of training, once you add that stress, that's when we're talking about 10 to 15 yards accuracy versus 100 yards accuracy. Right. And then the other issue is the ammunition. You're talking about being able to hold 30 rounds in a magazine versus 18 rounds in a pistol magazine. Yeah. So accuracy, ammunition, there's a reason that we don't send soldiers into war with pistols only. They go in with rifles because they're going to face rifles. Right. And unfortunately, that's what's happening in our schools. And as a parent, it's frustrating that we even have to have this topic or have this discussion.
Yes, sad reality. You, in your story, you named 2 school districts in Metro Atlanta that did not have officers trained in long guns. Some people may see that as, well, you're tipping off maybe a potential future school shooter. Talk to me about the decision to name those school districts.
Yeah, we had quite an editorial discussion about this. In this story, we didn't even promote. We didn't have advertisements running on television where, a lot of times in the local media, we get accused of sensationalism. You could almost see the promo, school shootings, are your kids safe? We didn't do that.
Which, by the way, I did not think the story came off as sensational at all. It was more informative for me.
No, and I appreciate that. But we had a very robust editorial discussion because here's the problem. We know and could ascertain in every district which school had a school resource officer with access or training in patrol rifle and which didn't. We didn't identify specific schools. We were very careful because we didn't want to advertise soft targets. We didn't want to say, hey, if you have a rifle, go to this school because you're not going to face any armed resistance here. That officer only has a pistol. We didn't want to do that. But when it came to the district-wide districts like Atlanta Public Schools, Clayton County Public Schools Police, those specific police departments had 0 school police officers trained in patrol rifle. And we thought it was important to point out because merely asking that question spurred these districts to change their policies. We weren't advocating one thing or another, but simply asking the question, why don't you have any rifle-trained officers, got both of those districts to reevaluate their policy and realize, it needs to be updated. And one more thing, Andy, where this story came from is interesting because, we get our stories the same way people get their Facebook posts or Instagram posts. Yeah. We see the world. Yeah. But we see the world with different eyes, I think. And what happened in this case was there was a small car accident on school property. It involved my family's car, and so police had to come out and write a report. I was just talking with the school resource officer, and I said, and he knew what I did for a living. I just said, hey, where do you keep your patrol rifle? Is it in the trunk locked, or is it in the cab of your cruiser locked? Because they keep them with these special locks so that someone can't just break the glass and get to the rifle. Yeah. And he said, patrol rifle? I don't have one of those.
Ding, ding.
And I said, you're the only school resource officer at my daughter's school. What are you going to do if someone comes here with a rifle? And he said, well, I have to go after him with this pistol or wait for local police. And as a journalist, that really struck me. This is a fully trained, fully certified police officer. He, by definition, is going to be the first officer on the scene if there's an incident at that school. And when he said I might have to wait for other police to get here to engage the shooter, that means more people could die. And here's another thing. You may remember I pitched this to the team as a story, and we all kind of agreed it was a hypothetical at that point. Then the shooting happened at Covenant in Nashville, and I still had a file on this. And when I saw that video of the police officer engaging the shooter at range with a rifle, while that shooter was engaging targets out the window with a rifle, I knew lives had been saved. It was obvious. There was no judgment call. And there we had the example to go then ask the question.
Wow. The always curious Brendan Keefe, I learned a lot in this story, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of reaction that we don't know about after local law enforcement and school districts see this story. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy.
And we'll see you again in the next edition of Behind the Investigation on Atlanta News First Plus.